My definition, very broadly, of environmental justice is the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on a community. And often the communities that are impacted are low-income, communities of color, and so the impact is multiplied, really.
Well, it's, I think one of the things that I often think about when I hear that word, oftentimes when we say environmental injustice, really what we're talking about is the injustice related to impacts on our environment.
Yeah, environmental justice. I think environmental justice can be seen sometimes as having a lack of access to particular things, and really focusing sometimes on the injustices that can exist, that maybe toxins or unhealthy environments that somebody might have access to. But the way I like to think about it is actually, what are those particular conditions that everybody should have access to? And
so when I think about environmental justice, I think about benefits, I think about who's benefiting, who pays, and then who decides.
Well, my career started in the early 1980s, and so I have seen from the start of my career to now a huge change in environmental justice. And the phrase didn't exist, and the communication didn't exist with anybody between any of the public and agencies when I started. There was at some point early in the 80s a case law that said that they had to notify people, and they fulfilled that by putting notices in the newspaper on Thursdays, and Thursdays were called government days in the newspaper ads.
I'm old now. And I think that the consciousness, it's really interesting, the consciousness of environmental justice has like become. Like when I started, I wasn't working in environmental health, I was working in social work. And so my awareness of environmental justice issues didn't come until the 1990s and and into the 2000s mostly.
You live in a country that the majority of the population's white, has different origins. Not the norm is not a person of color or an immigrant. So I'm really glad to see that the agencies, regionally and federally, are actually addressing those issues and thinking about it and having it more present in everything they do, or at least they say.
I definitely see much more sophistication, I think, in some of the many of the nonprofit communities that I work with. They have always been just incredible organizers. I think one of the things that I'm also seeing is I'm seeing more people from various experiences, particularly folks, from people of color or people who come from a low-income background or who have deep understanding and awareness of the impacts of economic, environmental, and social injustice.
Also in the 90s and the early 2000s, public health was very interested in diversity and social justice, and so I was on a team that was within public health that began to look at some of those issues. We also had in the 2000s, early 2000s, a group called Public Health Against Institutional Racism, and called FAIR, P-H-A-I-R, and so we were really doing some work to learn as well as to bring our agencies awareness.
In an effective EJ policy, what I would like to see is more active involvement of the community in every single sense that you can think of. First of all, I think it's very important that you get people involved, not only to get their opinions and their comments, but actually to be part of those regional agencies that are working towards EJ or on EJ issues. So, like hiring people from within the community to figure out a way in which they can address those issues.
Well, what I would like each agency to be able to have is the commitment from the top, the tools within the agency, and the staff within the agency who have the commitment and abilities to pull off environmental justice.
My hope and my belief is that as we work with planning, as we collaborate with other agencies that are responsible for the health of the community, as we partner with communities, we are also going to be seeing healthier and healthier communities along the full spectrum of equity. And that, that I sort of hold that as a vision. I hold that as a hope, wish, dream. And I think we're taking steps. We've so far to go, but we're certainly taking steps in that direction.
This whole process of getting EJ communities involved, underserved communities, minority groups, it's a slow one as well. It's very challenging. So I hope that the agencies actually do realize that, and they start working with the communities slowly in a culturally appropriate ways, because there's so many different groups that are being affected, and each of those you need to know how to work with them and for them. So just being open-minded and flexible, and working with taking that time to seriously include them and make sure that their input and comments and values and concerns are truly represented in those decisions that are being made by the agencies.
The most important lessons working with communities of color and lower-income families especially, our issues are not necessarily top priority for everyone. The environmental community and the environmental movement is a movement of privilege, and it is something that I feel blessed to be able to work on, but I have to always remind myself that it's not necessarily the top priority for everybody.
There's a lot of really important knowledge. They do have the knowledge that scientists or social workers or people that work for agencies that actually make the decisions need.
It's about working more efficiently. It's about going to the more root causes of the problems and really trying to prevent some of the negative outcomes from happening in the first place. So I think it's a constant learning opportunity. If it's about how we work with communities, we are always learning how to be better listeners.
Well, I think being humbled, I think, is probably the thing that I've found, just the ability of, aunties and sisters and cousins and friends and brothers and fathers to come together and to advocate for their community and to advocate for their family.
Wow. I think the most important thing that we can do is listen. And that as we listen, we need to put aside, as government and as individuals, we need to put aside our belief system and our way of viewing the world, so that we can hear with open minds and open hearts, and then absolutely find ways to interpret and integrate that information into the ways we do business and the ways we can move forward.
The work with communities of color and low socioeconomic status happened much more strongly in the late 80s and early 90s with the cleanups. And the things that I've learned is that you have to, you can't have working hour meetings, 8 to 5 meetings. So timing is very important. You can't have meetings in just English anymore. You have to provide for the language of the people who are there. I think it's very important that you provide some kind of food for them, because they're tired and stressed, and if they can have something to eat, they will come and listen. And they do care. They just reach real walls, real physical limits of what they can do.
We're still learning as a body of energize people about how to do this work, and we must still continue to learn because we don't do it very well all the time. We're still relying on government documents to tell the story, and often the government documents are framed in a way that is trying to achieve an end goal, but those documents, whether translated into a different language or not, didn't involve the people that they're trying to reach. So I think we've seen success where we start by having a conversation about, what's relevant to the community that we're working with. Is it environment, or is it access to transportation to get to work, or public health issues, or something else? But over time, to be able to have the conversation about something that we're working on. And including them in material development, including them in messaging, including them in helping us understand what our own shortcomings are, what our own biases are.
I think it's really important for us to think about, A, what kind of resources are we bringing? Are we just there asking people to do something, or is there something tangible that we're bringing that will meet their need? It may not be something that's specific to your project or program, but it's around what does this community need?
What I've found it's the most efficient or effective or meaningful, it's actually one-on-one conversations with community members. And those conversations sometimes don't happen, not necessarily have to happen at the place where you feel comfortable as a staff member of an organization, but at the place where the community members are actually comfortable. And one-on-one conversations, that's when you get the most meaningful information. You make a connection with that person. You see them, you look at them on their eyes, you have that conversation, you talk, they are real to you, you become real to them as well. You're not just like a bureaucrat up there that, wants to get information from you for, you don't even know sometimes what for.
As accessing people in their homes is a delicate dance, right? It's not always often that folks are welcoming of strangers to come to your door at a business setting. Certainly not the case at home. But our team, as I said, is made up of folks from all around the world who I think are viewed as community connectors. They're really people who are trusted within their communities to figure out the best course of action and talking with elders, children, adults within their community about a specific issue or a topic. So, in I'd say the last dozen years or so, we've used almost any outreach strategy at our disposal to try to talk to families, using kitchen table conversations in the home, doing focus groups, doing surveys, inviting people to workshops, meeting people where they're at, going to other community events or activities. It really does sort of vary, but I think one of the important things that we've learned is that it often requires a little bit of everything, I think, to really, truly successfully reach somebody.
There are, for us, is recognizing that the community has a lot of assets, and a lot of strengths, and I think when we work most effectively with communities is when we're able to work with those organizations and identify those leaders, those true leaders, because they're leaders at all levels.
So you come to know who the leaders are in the community, and through their sharing about what the needs and wants are, you come to know the community better. I attend meetings of, like in South Park, the neighborhood association meetings. I watch the website and I watch the listserv of the communities. I think it's just staying really deeply connected to what's happening and then being known as a resource to that community, so that when other things come up, when the South Park Bridge is closing, how could public health support getting a new bridge? How could public health support some of the other things that have happened down there.
So the procedures of outreach that have been most effective for us have been generally the ones where we're using our team specifically for the residential community, so just citizens of South Seattle or King County, where our team are using their relationships and their networks, their family, their community members, people from church, from temple, from mosques, every access point that they already have as a starting point to educate ourselves and to inform ourselves of our outreach strategy, to test our theories, to engage them in dialogue and talk about whether or not what we want from them is actually important to them. And that will then influence, I think, the longer term vision of what our outreach strategy is and goals are.
I think each person finds their own way, and the way to find your own way to stay on top of environmental justice issues is to stay aware. When you read the newspaper, watch the news, listen to the radio, look on websites, look at social media, to be literate about what is on the media.
I think the issue is very large. And I think we can sometimes be even paralyzed by where we start and where we can make an influence. But if we begin to look at those determinants, those particular issues, and where we can actually make an impact, because we need to address all of them. We can't address only one of them. So if you're able to make a difference in terms of education, it's hugely important, or in terms of housing, that's hugely important, or of healthy foods, it's hugely important. And these aren't things that work separately. These are all part of the same solutions.
Most importantly, you can be most effective in joining an environmental organization and doing whatever work that can happen, because through environmental organizations, they can more readily, just as ours does, hire people who are from the community and provide food for community meetings and provide them in a place that the community is used to going to and has an adequate facility for them.
So there are many ways that people can actually get involved in order to help us address environmental justice issues that we're working on here in Seattle. I'm going to tell you about one that's actually happening as we speak. The Duwamish River, Seattle's only river, it's a very polluted place. It's one of the most polluted sites in the nation. And EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is the federal agency that oversees its cleanup and enforces its cleanup. They're releasing the proposed cleanup plan for the river. And what that means is that they will allow, there's going to be a 105 days window in which people can actually provide public comment and give them feedback on that cleanup alternative that they're promoting, which as of right now we know it's not good enough, because it leaves the river polluted enough so that people can actually eat fish from the river. And there's 2 tribal nations that have fishing treaty rights on the Duwamish, and there are so many different cultural and recent immigrant groups that fish on the Duwamish. Some of them low income, and that's one of their only avenues or ways in which they can actually access protein or fish. So during those 105 days, actually the RCC and EPA and other partners will be hosting different formal public hearings, public meetings. We will host educational workshops to inform and educate and empower the community through this process.
I think for me, one of the things that people watching this can do to contribute to the EJ movement is recognizing that, I think EJ, environmental justice, is fairly, can be narrow. I think one of the things it's important is to recognize really it all boils down to justice. And so whether it's environmental justice, whether it's social justice, or whether it's economic injustice, I think that we all have to take a stand for justice.